Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today we have Michael Tsarion joining us. And while the channel is called Esoteric Thoughts, whilst I'm referred to as esoteric, the topic that I've never ever discussed on the channel is what is the meaning of esoteric. So Michael, can you please talk to us about the term esoteric?
Yeah, sure. It's a great subject, actually, to get into words like that. Esoteric, of course, is always explained by its opposite, exoteric. Well, what's that? Where did these words come about? What do they really refer to? And as you know, like on your channel, you're using it in a certain context. So do I. You can use words in a multiplicity of contexts, which is good. You should never shy away from exploring words, and they should be used in both connotative and denotative senses, because that's part of our exploration. The words we use are a two-way signal. They head us back. It's like listening to a piece of music you've composed, or stepping back and looking at a canvas that you've painted. It'll tell you where to go next. It'll speak to you backwards, and our words do that as well. So we learn from the very words that we've actually created, which is a most extraordinary dynamic, actually. But again, esoteric, yeah, exoteric, implicate order, explicate order. It's handy when there's an opposite directly, because introvert, extrovert, and so on. Introversion, extroversion. It helps when there's a direct opposite. But yeah, esoteric in its broad meaning is anything that maybe comes out of the Hermetic tradition, that which is above most people's general thinking, especially even levels of like professors. You could say, oh, Einstein's work was really esoteric. So anybody who's like a genius can use that term, just like the term Gnostic. There's another one that jumps to mind. I'm not a Gnostic, but I use the term because there's a secondary meaning of the term, which is gnosis, knowledge. It's just a Coptic Egyptian word for knowledge. And it can mean pure, right? The pure ones, like the Cathars. You don't have to be a Cathar to be pure. The word Catholic, look up the word Catholic. It means pure ones, white ones, with the idea of purity, Gnostic. So you don't have to actually be a card-carrying Gnostic who believes, in what they believe, this whole thing about a demiurge and archons and all. You can use the word Gnostic in a much more sort of secondary connotative way. And so you can use this word esoteric in its connotative way to represent, oh, that jazz guy, wow, he's doing chords nobody ever heard of before. That's real esoteric. Or so Philip K. Dick, somebody writing a very surreal, like nonsense type of writing, prose, or say like a Lewis Carroll, writing nonsense poetry. You go, that's really over my head. That's esoteric. So there's the general use of the word, and I think everybody's familiar with that word. But then when it comes to the more denotative meaning of the term, as it might have been used through history, it represents, of course, the Hermetic secrets that are, largely incomprehensible to people. I can't get my mind around that. Where's the proof? So in that sense, but then why I wanted to talk to you about this is because, of course, in that context, I don't think most people in the New Age movement, and even in this alternative groups, really know what esoteric is. They're using the term all right, but do they really know? Maybe it's a little bit too foggy. They're using the connotative term and then getting into a big mess over it. Because actually, if you really boil it down, esoteric is a thing to do with really personalism. Hermetic also means silent. Hermetic means shut away, like it's hermetically sealed. The early glyph for the Hermeticist was a little child, Horus, with his finger to his lips. And one can get into all of that. There's even deeper meanings to that. But the idea was that the Hermeticist is really one who's doing a very private and introspective work. Well, if you're on some podcast, radio show, and and we do this all the time, and you're saying, well, yeah, Michael, give us a message for all of humanity. Well, that's exoteric. So if you get my train of thought. So anything that is done for a personal awakening, a personal investigation, that can be either specifically or generally esoteric. But the moment people in this movement are hitting you, and I have it up the kazoo all the time, right? Where they're saying message for humanity, solutions, solutions, solutions. You mean the we, the us, and the our, is you're referring to the masses, right? The moment that that's even part of the narrative, esotericism has got out of the window. And I see this, across the board. It's not a bad thing. By all means, if you want public solutions, political solutions, social solutions, your focus is on that, then that's fine. But that's exoteric, and that's where the difference is. So the one who really wants to be a purist in this just needs to know that what is called esoteric involves really you, yourself, and that's it. And the real sage, the ones who's on a hermetic path, needs to know this, because you see, they then are people whose words or meanings are of a different flavor and a different intention. They're not speaking to the crowd. They're not speaking to any crowd. As a matter of fact, if you take it to its fullest meaning, the esoterist doesn't have a public message. His words are not for groups. So I don't know what will we do with that. I've got no answer to that. I'm just trying to define the term. The esotericist, like the hermeticist, is part of the school of life, as the Egyptians called it. But the school of life is where you are the teacher and you are the student, where you are the high priestess, you are the high priest. And the journey is got to be, by definition, if it's truly esoteric, private. A point might come down the line, or may not come, where you're going to speak to the audience and get that message out through a book, through a poem, through public talks, but we're not talking about that. The most of the journey, of the fool, the path of the fool, or say the, as it's now being called, the Siddhartha, the Siddhartha Road, as I've called it, the Siddhartha Road is got to be private in a very profound sense of the word. And the moment that it becomes collectivized in a religion, and this pertains to questions of religion, and to say a new age mumbo jumbo, right? All of that, it just has ceased to be esoteric. People are still using that term, but we're already derailed. We're already, off the track of what it really means to be esoteric. And so when you're on the beach and looking at the sunset, and when you are in that moment of awe and wonder, and the wonder of wonder and all of that, that's esoteric. The moment Joe Schmo comes over and goes, "That's beautiful, isn't it?" and you share it together, it's exoteric. And so that needs to be very, very defined. So actually, although I see these movements going in a certain direction, some terms, and especially this one really, have been poorly defined. And it came time to really help to define that. So, be aware that anything that involves another is basically exoteric. No matter what name you like to give it, it's exoteric. It just is. And there's nothing wrong with it. We need sharing. We need community. We need groups, all for what it is. But the esoteric, no ancient hermeticist would have allowed us to misuse that word, unless we understood it. So the esoteric says, this is my private journey. And I'm just now at the point where I want to express some of those things to the rest of the world. And it also goes in the natural world. The implicate order is something you're not going to see with your senses. You might get to have a few clues, with the intuition, and maybe a handful of mysteries will be explained through science. But look, the implicate order is off limits. That's why it's called implicate order. And the explicate order is the stuff that you see all around you, from which you must deduce. That's where your intuition comes in. Seeing the chinks, deducing from what you can see some other purer, deeper reality. But then the next step, of course, after you define the word, maybe is to say, well, what constitutes the doctrine of esotericism? What did they teach in the house of life, the school of life? What did they teach? What is an esoteric principle then, Michael, right? And then, then you look to different scholars for that. And maybe you can talk about that. One of the first would be, in my estimation, again, this is all personal, is the idea that, and this comes out of the whole idea is that in every esoteric, for the esotericist, He's done something quite unusual that we normally don't do. We do it, but it's not normal. You'll find it in scholarship, in academia, to a degree, and that is to play the devil's advocate. That is that any premise that you hold, any belief or cherished idea, and this goes for religious people or anybody, do you know, can you play devil's advocate? That means, can you know the direct rebuttal to every one of those beliefs, cherished beliefs, let's say, or ideas, or opinions, or theories? In other words, do you know them better than anyone coming at you from the outside? This is an esoteric principle, because you don't get it in the exoteric world at all. There may be just a nod toward that. Oh, I know what you're going to say. Yeah, you're coming from the right and I'm coming from the left. So it's there in the exoteric world, but in the esoteric world, it's this thing that needs to be really inflated, really brought to the table. Every idea I hold, every thought I have, and certainly my cherished principles, am I able to play devil's advocate and know the opposite position before anybody else comes to me? And so that this also helps on a practical level, because if you are challenged, you know, and you may well be, before they speak, am I already aware of what they're going to say? And more so, do I have the answer ready and waiting? This is more complicated than people would think, because it means a certain objectivity that has to be required. It means that it's certain objectivity, you know, you have to stand outside yourself and be able to have that discourse, you know, the sort of Socratic, it's known sometimes as a dialectic. I don't know if that's the really best word, but just discourse, dialogue with yourself and play devil's advocate. You know, I believe there's an afterlife. Well, obviously somebody's going to come along and go, no, there isn't. Show me the proof. You see, so like that. Every idea. Now, the exoteric person never does this, or rarely ever does. And if they do it, they're being forced to do it. Like they're in law school or they're taking a class on philosophy. Oh, bloody hell, I don't like this part of it. I only know what I hold. Yeah, but the world is full of people who are going to, you know, come up and contradict you on that. Have you worked that out? Have you gained the sophistication? Because this is where it's really leading. It's leading to a philosophical discipline, you know, the law of contradiction, you know, because contradictoriness is part of one's own life. You will find yourself contradicting yourself. As you grow, you'll believe one thing when you're a teenager and you'll believe another thing later on. So contradiction is not bad. In fact, I don't even really like to call it contradiction. It's variegation. It's the fact that I'm exploring, and I may completely dump something that I believed about people, about the world, about God at any given point in my life and take up something else. It's not really contradiction. It's literally the variegation of the world. So this law of contradiction, though, to use it in a soft sense, is really what we're talking about. Playing devil's advocate with yourself. And if you can't do it, you can't do it, because, you know, it's foreign to you, because it is foreign to most people. And only the highest hermeticists can do it, where they can hold an idea, and before anyone can speak to contradict it, they already know where the contradiction is. You know, sort of like Arthur Conan Doyle, you know, kind of a Sherlock Holmes type thing. I think it is excruciatingly important, but at the same time, never to do it compulsively, because somebody listening to this will go, right, I'm starting to do this, and then they obsess about doing it. That's not what I mean either. It's like in meditation, people ask you 1,000 times, so Michael, meditation, I've read that it means, you know, the awareness of awareness, which only human beings can do. And you have to say, yeah, heightened awareness in general, deeper sensitivity to life, more awareness of your body and your thoughts. But at the same time, awareness of awareness has a downside. Where's the spontaneity if I'm trying to be aware of if everything, you know, it's like a musician nicely flowing, playing the violin, and the moment you think, oh, what am I doing? You get tied up in the strings. It's all over, right? You've lost it. You've lost the fluidity. And so children don't think about why they're doing anything. They're not aware of their awareness, and yet they're children and having a great time. So in meditation, you're in these paths, they're saying, and even in Christianity, you get it too. Be aware of your awareness. Right, I will. But I can't do it to the extent where life itself now, the fluidity and spontaneity of life, is contradicted. So we have to really look at some of these principles that sort of underlie New Age mysticism, whatever, and see that they're not all together, you know, right. Then I'd say the second principle of esotericism is similar to what I've said, but different. This applies now to your own life in general, and that is when you go out to experience. It's this. Well, I'm a experiencer in the world of experience. You know, you keep hearing this, or I'm an I out there experiencing, you know, in the five senses world. In this way that you're sort of set off from the world, you're set back of it, and that's fine. Most of us have that objectivity. Nothing wrong with it. But again, it's something of the exoteric world in which you're just this sort of experiencer, passively experiencing things. There's another mode of being, and that is the esoteric one, in which anything that happens to you, you don't just experience it. And this can be particularly true of, say, bad things that happen to you, or weird things, or things that sort of, you know, bring up the question of what the hell, why did that happen? Why did I meet that person? Why did I go through this tribulation? And the esoteric principle is to turn the whole thing around and do exactly that. Ask yourself what you did to bring it about. Now, again, there's a lot of there's a lot of verbal acceptance of that principle, especially in the New Age movement. But is anybody actually doing it? Because there's great healing in this. And ultimately, as an esoteric principle, it's vital to the journey of the Siddhartha road. And if you're not doing it, you're not on the road. You know, just paying lip service to it. We need to turn things around, and people can pick a particular, you know, thing that happened in their life, right down to, you know, why am I born in this family? Or why did I go to that school? Or why did I, you know, make those stupid bum business decisions? And why did I think that friend was so bloody wonderful? You know, that's right. The esoteric thing is to examine the snapshot, because all you have is the memory of it, right? You're actually not there anymore, but you have the snapshot that arises in your head. And so much can be said about that. So then you look at it, we call it a memory. And the esotericist is very much predisposed to be able to say, what was in my head at that time? Is it because I wanted to be somebody, or I admired something in those people, or I wanted to impress those people, you know? So whatever it is, just cultivating this understanding that I'm turning the whole thing around and putting myself, what did I do? Or who was I at that time to bring this about? And to analyze that. And I think that when people do it, they just do it very, very superficially. And they don't really glean as much wisdom that they possibly could if they did it to a much deeper extent. While, as I said, not obsessing about it, because if you took it to obsessive levels, then you're going to be some sort of solipsist who is just lost in your own subjectivity. You lose objectivity, you know. So there's limits to all of these things we're talking about here. But the good part is we are beings who have this ability. Don't you see that the very idea of turning a thing around is a human trait, a human ability, and we are actually able to do it. So by not obsessing about it, because that's not good. In fact, it can even be dangerous to obsess, but just to sit calmly, you know, at the kitchen table, you know, with a cup of tea, and just say, let me think about where I was before, and what was I, you know, what led me into that, you know, and do that kind of research in your mind. It's a valuable principle of objectivity, and it's also highly valid on the esoteric road, because now you're learning about yourself through that, because through all experiences, it's not just you on a sensational level having experiences like 90% of the world is doing. No, you're on the Siddhartha road in many ways, whether you like it or not. And the esoteric man knows that he is, takes up that fact, and then wants to investigate his role, his footprint in the action. So what was I doing with that? Was I using somebody there? Did I think I could climb the ladder? Or was I being overly caring about that? Is that my problem? That I'm a martyr, I'm a victim? That any sob story comes along and Jesus, you know, I'm selling my soul for years to that person, only to find out later on when they get back on track, I'm blasted out the door. They don't give a shit. Wow, what did I do? Right? You see, there's the thing that happened, and then there's the deeper psychological question of what you did to bring that about. And I believe that that's you know, one of the defining marks of an esotericist. One could add, those are huge, of course, you know, and there's quite a list, but these ones are the ones that, you know, through my studies, I feel are important. If there's another one, then it would be based on the mind of a beginner. We get this very strongly out of Taoism, but we also do get it in the Socratic tradition. You know, I know that I know nothing. I know that I'm always on the more ignorant than I'll ever be wise and all of that. And you get it. There's a great Bruce Lee quote, in which he just nailed it. And he said, every morning when I arise, like a pupil at his first lesson, I prepare a blank mind for the day to write upon. So this mind of the beginner is absolutely crucial. And we see it slipping away. Our entire world, our Western ethos, is not only far away from nature, but it demands the opposite. It's not a request. It doesn't allow you that ability to prepare a blank slate for the day to write upon. Because it's all about what you know and the hoops you've jumped through and the expertise you've got and the PhD and, you know, all that. So our world no longer has this virtue and probably will never have it again. You've got to fight the world in order to have the mind of a beginner. But the mind of a beginner is important too, because it also includes a light hold on what you're doing. That's one of its manifestations, right? So you're deep into something, you know, you're this business owner, you're this writer, whatever role that you've adopted. This means I can leave it tomorrow. Some uncle of mine, I was driving with him in California, and this guy was like wealthy and everything. He's driving down the, you know, we were going from, I think it was Bay Area to LA through Monterey. And by the time we got to Monterey, he's in this lecture about, dude, if this car just smashed up against the tree there, right? You know, I just walk out and walk away. I wouldn't cry about it. And that really affected me. You know, it's like, what? And he was saying, yeah, if I lost all my money and all, I'd just start again. I couldn't be bothered with it. Of course, his wife knew he was having a heart attack in the front seat listening to this. Guess she didn't know, you know, this part of him, like, but I was sitting in the back and just like, wow, that concept really, you know, came to bear. And that's what I'm talking about. It's a very alpha state to be in, you know, to say, I have what it takes to build again. Anyway, and it's also this renunciation idea that they're only material objects any freaking way. You know, so like that, it includes that. It includes this ability to not be obsessed and have nervous breakdowns just because something happened to you. You can be sad, always process legitimate emotions by all means, but always have back of that this feeling of, look, it doesn't matter. Life is precious. People have less than I do. And also, I just literally can let go, you know, and to really meditate on that and meditate on the fact of whether we can have the blank slate. I just said, you know, we're not in a world where we can have that. But don't let it at least be erased as a principle from a person's memory, you know. Try to do it in your own, try to cultivate it. And if need be, start again. Right? A mathematician has been working for years on this formula. It's just not coming together. Right, that's it. Scrap the lot and come with the mind of a beginner. Go back to basic principles. A forensic cold case file, people. You're looking at all this reports and rubbish and boxes of evidence. It's staring you right in the face, what it is, right? But no, clean it off, you know, just completely dismiss all the previous evidence and all the previous reports. Go back and talk to the witnesses fresh. Go back to the scene of the crime fresh. Open all the boxes fresh. And look at it like it's brand new. And what do you know? It gets solved. Oh, wait a minute. That person said they were there at that certain time. Well, they got it wrong because they were in a different time zone. So they're liars. Yeah, that's right. We never noticed that before. 6 a.m. over in the East Coast is you know, 9 a.m. over in the West Coast. How did we not see that before? Nailed. Fucking liar. There you go. Their alibi is gone, right? So you go and look at it again. And then if there's a fourth principle, in the esoteric tradition, the only thing I can really think of is that it's the difference between destruction and deconstruction, which is, again, I'm amazed to say, has not really sunk in to people in the New Age movement or the so-called alt-right, not alt-right, but the alternative research group, I call them. Community is one of these talismanic words I'd rather not use. So just group is about the best you can get. But they still haven't seemed to fathom, and as a lot of people in the world haven't, there's a massive, massive difference between destruction and deconstruction. Huge one. But if something is destroyed in your life, chances are you ain't going to know. You're not going to see it as being deconstruction because you're not an esotericist. If something happens where the car does crash into the tree and you have to walk away, later on you'll say, that was a very destructive thing that happened. Hey, I went through a divorce. I lost my business to charlatans. A second in command stabbed me in the back and took over my business that I'd worked on for decades. I come up with all of this music, and the next thing I know, I'm hearing on the radio, some bugger nicked it, and he was my best friend. You see, all of these things are destructive, apparently. But the esotericist knows the difference. There's a lot of stuff that looks like destruction, which actually was deconstruction. It happened for a reason, and often a very, very important reason. When the chrysalis breaks out of the shell, when a butterfly comes out as a chrysalis, that looks destructive, right? When a chicken breaks through its egg, do you realize how cathartic destruction is? How brilliant it can be? How it serves truth? Since, after all, truth is the most destructive thing anyone could ever imagine. But it's wrong to say it's destructive, or it's partly wrong to say it's destructive. It's more deconstructive. But it still has a very, very, big entrance. It still is a very dramatic thing. But just to think about that, it's often also known as apophatic in the terms of allowing yourself to deconstruct the lies in order to get to the truth, another esoteric principle. And most people are not doing this. Now, we know that some scientists do this. They do break down the lies to get to the truth. Detectives are probably, the police and the detectives are probably the ones who really execute this esoteric principle in the exoteric world. But my God, there's all these people running around calling them esotericists, calling themselves that, and they don't do this at all. Say somebody, you were following a guru type, and you suddenly found out, oh, he was a bad boy, he's a pedophile or whatever, or was doing some other, shenanigans. You just think that your world was destroyed. I trusted in him and I gave all my money. But there's a deconstructive aspect there to free you, to wake you up, right, from that charlatan, and to get you to maybe rethink the whole thing of why you submit your will to another person. So those are really a couple of points, and I hope that people will mull on that. But again, to realize that there are certain things that are poorly explained. A little bit going back to the first point, and that is that where the hell is this we, us, and our in any kind of philosophical debate? There's metaphysics, there's epistemology, there's moral philosophy, there's aesthetics, there's sociology. Okay, obviously in the sociology, you can see that my statements will be applicable to a mass of people. Don't be ruled by tyrants, etc. You could say, live by, try to do as much good in the world as opposed to evil. Try to be a good guest in the house of life while you're here. Try to leave the planet in a better position than you found it. As I said, do more good than evil. Treat other people as you would want to be treated. Right? Whatever edict you could live by. These are all things that have to be installed in here. And it's no good you living then in servitude to other people. So one then questions at the end of the day, whether there's even a we involved in really esoteric work. And there may not be. You see, this is what might divide. Because if you didn't know this, you could get into all sorts of, cul-de-sacs, trying to walk an esoteric path, but still carrying the baggage of the world, the baggage of what academia wants you to jump through, and standards and rules that really have no part of esotericism. But maybe because you haven't read enough or you haven't thought it through, you've also then carried these muddy principles into this pure temple. Because either, you may be afraid of aloneness, afraid of the journey, afraid of not having an audience, and so on. All sorts of things can intrude here, One might even add to this list a fundamental, and this would be more philosophical, a fundamental misunderstanding between the difference between self and subject. It's so common, this one. There's almost no place where you don't find it. And the reason why is because of a lack of psychology. It's not taught properly in school. And even when it is being taught, these simple things are being left out. There is a difference between self, the I, the real I, and ego. Or one could say ego and superego. Do you know how much the ego is bashed in all religion and all so-called mysticism and in the New Age movement? The minute that happens, I know they don't know what they're talking about. The superego is the culprit that everybody is meaning when they say ego. The ego is you. The ego is a German word for I. So it's just, and this is also a kerfuffle that spreads over, east to west, where the East have a very, very ugly attitude of I-ness and egoism, and the West does not. And so I don't think the twain can meet. You get into all these complications. Well, look, if the basic psychology had been worked out, you guys wouldn't have had these problems. The ego is a good thing. It's the center of what your I-ness is. It's the autobiographical self, right? That's pulled by different internal and external forces. Represent the superego being just nothing more than the representative of society in your head. And it's not necessarily a good thing. It has good aspects, but it also has some very, very negative aspects. So in philosophy, there's the self. And you need to know this if you're ever going to read any philosophical texts at all. And you certainly need to know it if you're going to go bouncing over to the East to hear what they've got to say. And you didn't know this, you'd be lost. You'd be wearing the t-shirt, you'd be buying into their deconstruction of the ego nonsense, which is the most dangerous edicts of any kind of pseudo-mysticism you can imagine. And it's rampant. So in short, we don't have time to explore it. But in short, the subject, even the word subject means sub, under, right? Submarine, subservient, subject, or the queen has her subjects. What does that word even mean? It means under. So in the healthy way, it means that which is myself. I'm subjective, the subjective reality. And the objective reality, right, is the outside world. That's a purely, denotative meaning, and there's nothing wrong with it. But there's a secondary meaning of the word subject that is not positive. And it's the being that you take yourself for after all the forces of parents and world are done with you. So it's not yourself. It's this Frankensteinian pastiche, this hideous monstrosity of everybody's wants, needs, expectations, and demands. It's formed so early, that we take it for the self that we are, and so so it overwrites the self. So where do you think your depressions come from? Even the suicide levels and even the child delinquency, right? If you are this Frankensteinian monstrosity walking around, obviously you're not going to be all right, because that sits over the real self and the conscience. Superego replaces conscience in the technical jargon. So you are a false self. That's what inauthenticity is. This is what falsity is. So the esotericist is interested in discovering his core self. He wants to welcome it. He wants to meet it on the road. Who am I? Right? We look at the gateway questions. Who am I? Where am I going? How did I get here? Those kinds of gateway questions. Well, this is subsumed under that. But if you're a subject asking those questions, already the questions are inauthentic. But only the esotericist twigs that. The exoterist, he joins some community, runs after a few spinner rack books. He doesn't realize who is asking the question and with what intention do I have. The intention can be actually inauthentic. That's why you end up following some inauthentic guru. You didn't stop to say, what are my expectations? What is my motive? What is my intention? Am I asking this because I want to go along with the flow, or some other people have told me about a holy path, or I saw something on TV, a documentary, or, again, it's the crowd I'm in with or whatever, and I'm doing it to be trendy? Well, we know that people do things to be trendy. Look at the 60s. Look at every movement that's come from breakdancing to skateboarding to twerking, it's all to follow some stupid, fashion statement. There's no different on the so-called spiritual path, with small s. The esotericist is looking, he's truly introverted, and he's doing a calculus. He's centroverting to say, who's asking this question? But of course, we don't have a society like that. They just stamp endorsement on what you're doing and off you go. And we've got loads of, different paths for you to tread. And you can join a multiplicity of different groups and all the rest of it. So the sad thing there is that this esoteric principle about looking at one's motives, it's a little bit like what I said about turning things around to ask, what did you do to create any of these things in your life? any of the relationship issues or whatever. This is something like that. It's an inflection on that thing. Am I really asking this from my core self? Now, you're going to have to know this, because at the end of the day, the first challenges that come up, the subject won't last. The subject will go, oh, well, I toyed with that and I'm out of here. The self can persist. The self can pursue and stay true to the path. Then you know that, yeah, I didn't just pick this up and throw it away. I didn't just get distracted again back into sensational existence. I was seeking truly for my vocation, and I pursued the path, to a quite lengthy extent, and I'm still doing it. I'm pushing through. So, but just the simple premise to realize that there is you're basically two people in one, and yeah, it really, really matters there to distinguish the self from the subject, and that can take years, that alone. And your guru ain't going to help you do it, because he wants you there. The guru wants a slave. So he might do some, sleight of hand to make you think that that's what they're on to. And most of the gurus do that, like these Eckhart Tolles and all that. But they really won't talk about this. They won't even talk about basic psychology. They might even nix it and start talking, as I said, in terms of an anti-egoic stance that they all take. And it's just worthless rubbish.
Michael Tsarion, thank you.